Werewolf for mitzvah, spooky, scary. Boys becoming men becoming wolves.
All right, that was great, Trey. Okay, it's over. That's a wrap.
Okay, welcome everyone. Good evening. My name is Andy. I am a production associate here at Hill International, and I have the pleasure of being your tech support tonight. So if you need any assistance at any time during this program, please feel free to send a message in the chat or use the raise hand feature or something. I will do my best to support. Two things to note. This program is being recorded as well as live streamed on Facebook. So bear that in mind for conduct. And I am going to be introducing our speaker for this evening. So we are joined by Olivia Devorah Tucker, who is your average trans femme Jewish demonologist who focuses on resurfacing and making accessible the fascinating connections to magical and supernatural wisdom found in the Talmud and beyond. They graduated from the University of Pittsburgh in 2016 with a Jewish Studies certificate. And in their time as executive assistant to the Rabbinic Office of Rodef Shalom, Olivia researched and taught classes on Malachim and Shadeem, or angels and demons, as well as classes on women in the Talmud and Jewish pranks. They live in Pittsburgh on Shawnee land, where they are involved with vibrant theater and bake challah based on the weekly Torah portion. See All Challahs Are Beautiful for more. Olivia currently serves as program coordinator for Svara, a traditionally radical yeshiva, and is a member of Svara's fourth teaching Kollel cohort. And I am so grateful and pleased that they are here with us tonight. So I'm going to hand over the microphone to them. Olivia, take it away.
Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you all for joining this evening. This is something I'm very excited to share, the Jewish Monster Manual. Hi, everyone. This is years of research pulled together and boiled down to an hour and a half for you. We talk a lot about dedicating learning sometimes as a way to make our learning lifted up. And I want to offer people the space in the chat to dedicate their learning of this material to somebody who needs a little bit of love, who's facing some monsters of their own, who you wish could connect with fantasy a little more. I want to offer a dedication today. It's October 27th, and as Andy said, I'm in Pittsburgh, where only 3 years ago we had a real face-to-face with living monsters, with the shooting at Tree of Life and Dor Hadash, or L'Simcha Tree of Life, and New Light, a number of congregations together. And so it's a pretty hard day. And as we think about the monsters from our tradition, we can also think about the real life monsters we're facing and dedicate to healing for those families and for everyone who was seriously shook by that day. I echo all of your refuah, all of the healing and health that is being wished in the chat. And I am so glad that we get to learn together tonight. So, Jewish Monster Manual. The Monster Manual is a reference to the good old D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, where you would get, in addition to the rules, you would get a whole book of all of the monsters you could fight or encounter or befriend or even play as if you wanted to. And it gives you all sorts of wonderful things. I think someday I'd like to write a sort of statistics book on Jewish monsters. But tonight, I want to give you a solid introduction to them. Let's see if folks, what you already know. Let's name some supernatural Jewish creatures we already know. Feel free to drop them in the chat. I don't know if folks can unmute, but I'm hoping to have some conversation here throughout the night. We got the Golem from Reed. Thank you. We got Dybbuk, Golems, Leviathan, Leviathan Behemoth, Dybbuk, Shadeem, nice. Leviathan, Leviathan Mom. I'm so excited to know what that's about. The Zug, I think it's the Zs, the giant bird that goes along with Leviathan and Behemoth. I love this idea that we kind of have zombies to some degree when people are going to be reborn at the time of the Messiah. Multiple Liliths. The Tachash, which is one of our 3 Jewish unicorns. Mazakin are like our demons. The unicorn that swam behind the ark, the ram. I love it. I'm seeing so many familiar names. Jewish vampires with long hair, Estes, the Shamir worm. We're going to get to so much of this tonight. I'm really excited that folks have some grounding here. I think when I was growing up, I was really given this very grounded in reality Judaism that I have been working and opening myself up to the wonders of supernatural Judaism. And I'm so glad that folks have come here with their monsters already. I want to say before I forget, I am, Andy described my background. If you could see me, I'm purple curly hair with bangs over one eye. I got a little headset on, some oily black wings from the Spirit Halloween store. Behind me, I have a stained glass window and a copper piece of art that we will get to later tonight. A nice pastoral piece and a mirror. Wearing purple eyeshadow and sharp eyeliner, just to give you a look of what's going on. The wings are feathery and go up to my head. I love them very much, and I got them this week. Okay, let's talk a little framing. These are some questions I'm hoping to have people thinking about while we go through. It's really fun to learn about these creatures, and it's also exciting to contextualize them, figure out what we can do with them. So, for framing, what can our legendary creatures teach us about ancestral imagination? How can we see and utilize these fantasies in our lives? Who here tonight would you like to learn more about from the Monster Manual? And where can you find more about them? And a fourth question, what makes something a Jewish monster? If folks have any thoughts that they want to bring to us, about these top 2 to start with, I'd love if you raised your hand in our Zoom space, and Andy will unmute you. It's okay if you don't want to. We can hop in later. I really love questions. Yeah, cool. Jesse, I think I saw first.
Hi, yeah, so to me what makes like a Jewish monster is that it has a specific link to our tradition and is sort of like criteria A, but for bonus points I would also say if it speaks to some sort of ancient fear or ritual of ours, something tying into our history as well.
Nice, I really love that. And I want to expand on that by saying that Jews come from all different backgrounds, and every culture has their own cryptids, their own beasties, their own take on the supernatural. And that when you have those intersections, that people bring their Jewish version of those forward. Nicole.
Looking at shared themes and motifs and archetypes across cultures can sort of show the historical connections between peoples, and it's an interesting way of looking at history, and it can really show like how cultures have changed over the years, how they've been influenced by others, how interwoven we all are. And it can also expose even in ways that aren't, sorry, I'm rambling, but yeah, I think I got my point across.
I love that. And I think you got your point across too. I think it goes with what Jesse was saying about ancient fears and ways that we see what our ancestors were trying to answer, what people were mystified by and could answer through a demon or any number of things we'll see. Groovy. Well, folks who have thoughts as you come through, please drop them in the chat or raise your hand. A lively discussion. I want to start off with one that most folks we're putting in the chat. We got the Dybbuk. Dybbuk comes from the Yiddish, Dybbuk, which comes from the Hebrew verb dabak, which means to adhere or cling. So a Dybbuk is a spirit that clings. They're sort of, to me, the quintessential Jewish nasty. And a Dybbuk is usually a corrupted or tormented soul, perhaps somebody who got way too deep into hardcore Jewish mysticism, like is depicted in S. Ansky's famous Dybbuk play, pictured here. A Dybbuk may also form from a negative energy in a space. They can possess, or as we said, cling, adhere to people, places, or objects. I used to think I had a Dybbuk in my basement, which is, I think, a story for another time. It turned out, I think the real issue was there just wasn't a window and it was supposed to be a bedroom. But the Dybbuk helped me process it more than the hard reality. If you do think you have a Dybbuk, you're going to need a full-on rabbinic exorcism to get it out. They might need to come and read all the Psalms, do more than that. Or perhaps I think you could let it go and give into its eventual business, and perhaps that will resolve the Dybbuk situation. I love the fear that everyone has that no one will go near her. She's possessed by a Dybbuk. She's wearing white and everyone else is in their black garments. She's dressed for her wedding that has gone awry with a Dybbuk. Somebody asked beforehand about the Dybbuk box, which is a modern eBay, I think, is the origin of the Dybbuk box as a urban legend about a Kiddush set that was haunted by a Dybbuk, and it was on eBay and bought by various people and totally haunted them. The person has said that it's totally made up, but I don't know. Who's to say that that might be false? I think that the Dybbuk first comes into culture in the Yiddish culture. So it's not Talmudic. We're going to look at a lot of things from Talmud because I really love Talmud. Yeah, Dybbuk box creepypasta. Very good. Yeah, I don't know I don't know last time there were rabbinic exorcisms, but I would love to talk more about forming a team to do that. A thought. The other side of the Dybbuk is the Ibor, which is the Hebrew for pregnancy or incubation. And Ibor is sort of like a good Dybbuk. It's the spirit of a righteous person who inhabits one's body in order to help fulfill a commandment or teach an important lesson. As opposed to Dybbuks, Ibors are usually benevolent, temporary, and actually often consensual. Here I have a piece of art from an artist named Ibor. I really couldn't find out much about them, but they go by Ibor, and this is their piece, Soul Transfer. A question about reincarnation in the chat. We certainly do have a whole history of reincarnation in Judaism. The Gilgul, the cycle and wheel of souls. We can talk a lot more about that in the future. This image has, it's in black and white, grayscale, with two faces and forms sort of overlapping with shadows of arms. While we're talking about Dybbuks and Ibors, I want to talk about ghosts in general. That we have many ghosts, and we have many ghost stories in the Talmud. Last year, I did a whole set on ghost stories in the Talmud, Gemara ghosts. And my favorite is this story from Brachot 18b about two ghost girls. It's a Rosh Hashanah story where every Rosh Hashanah, this real type A extroverted ghost asks her introverted ghost girlfriend, hey, you want to go up and go to the Pargod, God's heavenly curtain, where past and future are inscribed, and go hear about all the horrible things that will befall the world in the year to come? And every year, her friend sighs and says, I'm actually buried under a mat of reeds, and I can't go and play until my body is decomposed. So I think they're dating. And here, that's kind of your Bechdel pass for tonight, if you're looking for two women speaking to each other. like I usually am. Anyway, I have a piece on this coming up in a book by Kendon Alfond called Feeding Women in the Talmud, Feeding Ourselves. And there's a lot more there. This is the challah that I made. Andy mentioned all challahs are beautiful. And I couldn't find an artistic depiction of this story. And I don't really draw very well. So I baked a challah based on them. This is the Jewish Encyclopedia, the Encyclopedia of Jewish Myth, Magic, and Mysticism by Jeffrey Dennis, this book here. I called them Best Friends Forever, challah. Here she is trying to wake up her friend who's buried under a mat of reeds, a sort of cairn of stones in the moon. I got a question beforehand about, just catching up in the chat, okay, about werewolves, and if we have werewolves in Judaism. Well, while you were coming in, I played pretty much the best text on the subject, which is Werewolf Bar Mitzvah from 30 Rock. But you should know that there are many shapeshifters, especially through the Talmud. And as far as werewolves go, Benjamin, the youngest son of Jacob, like Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, his younger brother. He was a werewolf, and in fact, he ate his mother in childbirth, so that's pretty gruesome. And if you close read Daniel, the book of Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar kind of turns into an animal, kind of a werewolf there. But of course, the werewolf bar mitzvah, kooky Harry, boys becoming men, men becoming wolves, is I think the best text on werewolves. I haven't found much about them being connected in Jewish lore to moon cycles, which the Hollywood werewolf, when the moon is full, the person transforms into a wolf. Which is, I think, odd, because we have such a focus on lunar cycles. I would expect some tie-in of the moon. If you find a source like that, I would love to read more about it. Every once in a while, a poll goes out about, like, would you rather be a vampire or a werewolf? And I always think about it as which one would be easier to continue doing Judaism as. And I think vampire, even though we're explicitly forbidden from drinking blood because so many of the holidays are on the full moon. So let that one keep you up at night. Okay. Folks are adding the Leviathan and the Behemoth and the Zs even in the chat. Let's see. Yeah, some good conversation about how the calendars work. I appreciate that. These I like to call our 3 giant legendary Jewish Pokemon. I grew up with the 3rd generation of Pokemon where you had Groudon and the Rayquaza, and I'm actually forgetting the water one. Kyogre? Kyogre. Thank you, Tara. Which I think are just a take on these. This is from a 13th century Bible in Germany. It kind of depicts the behemoth as a red ox with big horns. The Zs as a griffin, sort of sad looking, looks a little in pain, with big red wings and the body of a lion. And the Leviathan as a really friendly-eyed, scaly fish. So what's going on here? We have 3 of the core elements: water, ground, water, earth, air. The other one for the rabbis was fire, which I think is represented by demons. Yes, I love this. Sahar asks, I heard Leviathan Behemoth were created as playmates or mates even. And we're wondering if the Zs is also one of the classical elements. Does that mean they're a polycule, a group of people who are all in relationship together? And I would love to encourage that kind of midrash. So Leviathan represents water, Behemoth ground. And both of those find their origin in Job 40 to 42. Job is a pretty successful guy who Hasatan, God's prosecuting attorney, makes a deal with God to really mess up his life and So Satan kills his kids and burns down his house and gives him boils. And at that point, Job lost everything, starts cursing God. And God shows up not to be like, hey, Job, it's okay. I made a deal with Hasatan. Instead, God goes, who are you to complain? Did you make the Leviathan? Did you make the behemoth? And gives some rather wonderfully poetic descriptions of them. The Zs is mentioned in the Psalms, and together they really captivated the rabbinic imagination for centuries. They all have incredible, incredible size. They're bigger than you can imagine. And the other thing that connects them is their fate, which is to be served to the righteous in the great banquet in Olam Haba, the world to come. So get ready for that. And I don't know what the vegetarian option is. Yes, giant behemoth brisket. Let's take a closer look at each one. This is the Leviathan Sukkah by Erica Wanamacher and Sarah Petrie. The idea being that at the end of days, not only will the righteous feast on the Leviathan, but will be holding that banquet under a sukkah of its flesh, of its skin. And so on the seventh day of Sukkot, or the last day of Sukkot, we make a special blessing that we may merit the opportunity to be in that situation. Let that sit with you as to think about why that was a great gift to them at the time. And so they're imagining this Leviathan as a sukkah. You can see the wood here and the people under it. So Leviathan is a gigantic Jewish sea monster. God had to kill all but one of them, or else they would be too numerous. They would take over the world. It's sort of sad, but at the same time, during the fourth hour of each one of God's days, God makes time to play and laugh around with the Leviathan. I don't really know how the Leviathan feels about that. I like this idea that Shoshana is offering a Leviathan's name connected to an Ugaritic sea god, Lutan or Lotan. Destructive sea serpents are a pretty popular motif. The ocean is still a place that we have not fully explored. And it's full of surprises, as it was in the time of the rabbis and the time that we are in now. Not that we've ever found the Leviathan, but we found some pretty massive stuff. So the behemoth, sort of the counterpart, natural counterpart of the sea, is land. So behemoth, behemoth, is easily translated as the plural of behemah, which is cattle or beast. So it's a singular animal that bears the name beasts. So it's very intense. It's perhaps even plural, you might say. My favorite author on the subject, zoologist, Orthodox Rabbi Natan Slifkin. In this book here, this is Sacred Monsters, Mysterious and Mythical Creatures from Scripture, Talmud and Midrash. This is really the book that got me into Talmud, because before this, I didn't know that we had this kind of stuff. And I certainly didn't know that it was in the Talmud, which I don't think I've defined yet, but is the writings of the rabbis, the conversations of the rabbis from around the time of the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, all the way to about the year 600 in Babylonia. So it covers hundreds of years. It has conversations about laws. It has conversations about rabbis' lives and things like the behemoth. Okay, so what's his take? His take is that the behemoth is the hippopotamus. That European commentators made such a myth out of the behemoth because they had never seen the very real beast that was described in the book of Job. Now, he's coming from a place where he wants, Bahamut is not the same, just to answer that question in the chat. The place where he's coming from is that he wants to be able to say that the text is true as often as possible, and wants to only say it's a metaphor when it needs to be a metaphor, which I think is very interesting because it leads to a lot of interesting work to find real-life parallels to ancient mythological descriptions. I like his take that it's a hippopotamus. I also like the idea that it's this huge beast here. I am putting in the chat the link to all of the art that is featured here. So you can follow that and open it up and have 100 tabs when you leave tonight. La la. All right, the third part here is the Zs. And this is Jacqueline Jules. She wrote the book, The Princess and the Zs. This is her Zs puppet, as well as a few more kid books. The Zs is a lot lesser known, I think, but it's actually the most powerful, and I think trans, because usually they refer to the Zs as he, but it also lays eggs. So, and like the other ones, there's only one of it left. So there you go. I'm pretty sure it's trans. The Zs stands ankle deep in the ocean and sings with its head in heaven. His wings are so huge that they eclipse the sun when he unfurls them, and sturdy enough that they protect the earth against the storms of the south. Quoting from the Legends of the Jews by Louise Ginsburg, once an egg of the Zs fell to the ground and broke. The fluid from it flooded 60 cities, and the shock crushed 300 cedar trees. Fortunately, such accidents don't occur frequently. As a rule, the bird lets the eggs slide gently into the nest. This was just a mishap due to the fact that the egg was rotten and the bird cast it away carelessly. This puppet here depicts with red wings as the Bible that we looked at earlier, this picture. With this yellow sort of chicken body with very long orange legs and a purple plume on top and a green friendly eye. John asks in the chat, like a siren. I will tell you that I don't have them prepared tonight, but we certainly do have mermaids and sirens in Jewish lore. Rashi knew about them, certainly, and many of the rabbis who took to sea saw certain things that were like that. Is this the origin of Big Bird? That's a great question. Yeah, I don't know. Is the Z's on Shalom Sesame? I feel like it should be. Okay. I'm going to show you now my favorite of the giant animals, which is giant frogs. Here we have, oh, I think I forgot to give you her website in the chat. Yeah, Rashi is a commentator in 11th century France. He kept a vineyard and he taught his daughters all of the Torah he knew. His commentary on the Talmud, 500 years after it was completed, is the reason why we're able to access it the way we do now. Catherine's question about are these in Sephardic and Mizrahi culture as well? I am speaking from an Ashkenazic background, and a lot of the things I know are very focused on that. I would say that the things that come from the Talmud are most likely shared, and that there are probably a lot of creatures that have a Sephardic and Mizrahi background that I don't know. And I would love if folks do know any. Feel free to share it in the chat. Giant frogs. This is an illustration from the fairy frog in Jewish fairy tales and legends from 1919. So we've been into this for a very long time. It's a giant frog the size of a couple people who are walking behind, and it has its arms out, sort of like a keep on trucking sort of look. Okay, so this is from Bava Batra. This is a story from Rabbi Bar Chana. We're in the Talmud. He tells the biggest of the tall tales in the Talmud and also teaches some law, but he had a lot of fun in his life. So Rabbi Bar Chana said, I have seen a certain frog, a krokta, which is, I think, onomatopoetic for a krokta, for what a frog sounds like. And it was as large as the Akra, which I think is a pun, the fort of Hagronia. And how big was the fort of Hagronia? As large as 60 houses. Big frog. A snake came and swallowed the frog. And then a raven came and swallowed the snake. And then it flew up and sat in a tree. Come and see how great the strength of the tree is, which could bear the weight of that raven. And Rav Papa Bar Shmuel comes on and said, if I had not been there, I would not have believed it. So we have a little backup. A very Chad Gadya moment, a Passover song of many animals interacting with each other. Now, those who need to wrestle with this give it an answer of being a big metaphor about the scholarship and how strong Torah is. I welcome you to find your own metaphor for it. I like to believe that this came in the middle of a class when everybody was falling asleep, trying to talk about some tricky laws of damages and such. And to wake everybody up, Rabba Bar Bar Chana brings this story of giant frogs. That's my take. Somebody asked about this one in the chat, and I've got one more giant frog for you. I have a whole source sheet on Safari of fantastic frogs, which I've forgotten to get the link prepped. But this is another challah that I made here for the giant frog of the plagues. So we're in Sanhedrin, and they take a verse from Exodus, where it says, and the frog, Svardeya, not you as you would expect the plural of Svardeya, frog, came up and covered the land of Egypt. So this is the second plague after the plague of blood in the 10 plagues. And so they're like, whoa, why is it in the singular? And Rabbi Elazar says, well, of course it was one frog, and it spawned and filled the entire land of Egypt with frogs. And later we get a Rabbi Akiva who quotes the same thing. Rabbi Akiva says it was one frog, and it spawned and filled the entire land of Egypt. It was a huge frog, broke into many frogs. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who's the head of the yeshiva at a very young age, comes up to him and he says, Akiva, what are you doing talking about Agadah, all of this storytelling, this midrash? It's not your expertise to do this. Please go and study Negaim and Oholot, the incredibly difficult tractates about the laws of impurities of leprosy and if something dies in a tent. And get your head out of Agadah. It was one frog. Yes, I read it too, but it whistled to the other frogs, and they all came after it. I think Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is sort of a party pooper, and you should feel free to believe that this is one giant frog. I saw somebody post this in there ahead of time. Yeah, Jesse. Jesse knows about the giant frogs. Yeah. You mentioned, Andy, about knowing the tune to summon many frogs. And you should know that not too far away in Sanhedrin, they talk about snake charming snakes and scorpions, which Deuteronomy tells you not to do, but only tells you not to do it because you can do it. And you can do it in particular to save your life if it's at stake. Okay, a good suite on giant animals. I want to take a little bit of a pause for some conversation. If folks have some things they want to share, raise your hand. Andy will unmute you. And yeah, Andy can unmute you. Woohoo! Some thoughts about what these mean, what this corpus of giant animals indicates about the past, what you want to do with them, what your questions are about them. Anything like that. Zaria, hi.
Hello. When I'm thinking about the giant animals, I'm thinking about proportion and perspective and how that relates to identity and how we can, just as we picture a single giant frog, how do we picture certain aspects of ourselves? Like when I'm in a cisnormative space, I have to perform transness and perform gender to a degree that is very distorted. And there are times when I have to shrink that down and pretend to be small, even though I know that I am of the vastness that could rival the zoo sometimes. So just holding that, how animals changing size can be a relationship for how we change size.
Thank you, Azaria. That's getting me to think too about how the pain of each one of these being the last of their kind, and Probably feeling very alone in being the last of their kind, but finding connection in each other, where they are all the last of their kind and all this massive force that cannot fully be understood or tracked down in reality, and can't be written down. It can't be like formed completely, but exists in this clear supernatural way. Thank you so much for that meditation. Noah.
Hi. Well, so I'm loving how you frame this as ancestral imagination. And I think what's sort of coming up for me is we look at all of these sources that are specifically from the Talmud, which we think about as like a really heavily law-based and thus like based in religious text set of texts. And something that's coming up for me sort of in conjunction with an idea that was brought up in another class I'm taking, how sort of in the US, sometimes Jews are viewed as a religious entity as opposed to like an entire peoplehood. And what I'm really loving is that like these moments where we get these totally ridiculous monsters and like I'm just loving how fun it is. And I'm thinking about how the fact that these parts of our text tradition really do so much more than just tackle religious concerns and like hold so much of like peoplehood and culture and the sorts of like fun stories that sort of flesh out a people as being way more than just a religion. So I'm just really loving how fun these moments are and that they're included in sources we would never think of as like having fun stuff to find.
Thank you so much. I think there is such a Jewish imperative to have and find and spread joy. I was taught we are not an ascetic religion. We're not like a religion of like withholding, but rather an aesthetic religion, one that loves the beauty and the details. Knowing that there was fun monsters in the Talmud was something that brought me to Talmud. And we'll get to demons, but they're on page 3 of the Talmud. It starts out very soon. And then they're used in legal cases to say about witnesses. What if a witness is a demon? And so the interplay between storytelling and law is so juicy sometimes. Sarah, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say how happy I am to finally hear your talk on this because like I've been ready for years to hear you talk. I'm always like, I could do a talk on this and it's so interesting. So I'm like so happy about it.
Thank you.
Anyway, I just think it's neat. I've heard a lot of different people talk about these creatures in different ways. One of my friends describes them as like the eldritch horrors of Judaism, which I think like is such an interesting position on it. But like I love the fact that we just have big frogs because like this is my little frog friend who lives in my bed and I think frogs are neat. So I'm pro big frog. Sorry.
Very much in agreement. Very much. This was a really fun challah to make. This part here is a 4-strand braid with the middle of it kept larger than the ends, so that it would puff up. And this is a round part, and these are all 3-strand challahs. 1, 2, 3, 4 different ones, with the little fingers of the frog, the little pads, pressed down once they had baked about halfway. Oh, thank you for Matthew bringing up in Mizrahi culture. So it says the jinn is mostly a Mizrahi Jewish mythical creature, mostly associated with Islam. And I've found that there's a lot of connection between Shadeem and jinn, and I think that there's sort of not much distance between them. Thank you. Okay. So we talked about really large creatures. I want to go real small. Yeah, Nicole, and then we'll show you the small stuff.
I mentioned it in the chat, but I I find it so interesting how the concept of the Leviathan, big sea snake monster, is so universal. I really love Norse mythology. I'm interested in mythology in general, but I know a lot about Norse mythology, and even like that far up, there's Jormungandr, which is very similar. Big sea snake, and I believe, although I don't remember precisely, but I believe if you go to Aztec religion, you'll see there's a massive eldritch abomination snake thing with all of its limbs or other limbs or all of its heads or other limbs, and it's a breathing mass in the primordial ocean that makes up land as we know it, and that's another big sea monster. No matter where you go, you'll find big sea monsters. It's so universal.
Do you have a theory? Do you have any pet theories about how we get that universality?
The sea is scary.
I like that one.
It's I don't think it's really that deep. I think it's just primeval fear of the unknown and fear of that big deep thing we can't go in.
Thank you so much, Jesse, and then we'll hop along.
Yeah, I like the sea is scary theory, but I would actually expand it to talk about really all of our giant creatures. So I think the sea is scary, but particularly for people living, 3,000, 5,000 years ago. There were lots of big scary fish, but they're also not that far into having domesticated animals. The oh god, what's the land one? It's a giant bull, and even the behemoth. Thank you. The behemoth is a giant bull. Even domesticated bulls today can be very dangerous, especially if you're operating on 1,000 BCE tech. I think it kind of plays into looking at the world 3,000, 5,000 years ago and not really having the same kind of science to explain away the scary things that we do. So coming up with their own explanations to represent them.
That's really interesting.
Thank you.
That's a good way of expanding it.
Hold that as well for when we get to the demons, the Shadeem. So we talked about large creatures. I would like to show you my favorite of the tiny creatures. This is the Shamir. The Shamir is the other side of the size spectrum. Regarding the building of King Solomon's temple, we hear that when the temple, was built, only finished stones cut at a quarry were used, so that no hammer or axe or any iron tool was heard in the building. And ignoring the first half of the verse, Rabbi Yehuda, and we're in the Talmud tractate Sota, 48b, teaches that King Solomon used the laser vision of the teeny tiny, the size of a barley corn, Shamir, which means to protect, shomer is the root there, to hew all of the stones from the temple. Rabbi Nehemiah, who managed to read the first part of the verse, claimed that the Shamir still existed and was used to engrave the gemstones that are on the high priest's breastplate, which name all of the different tribes, which is still a very fantastical thing to be able to do. Here we have a couple different depictions. This one from a German book from the 1600s, a worm gobbling stone, which it has a delightfully mouth with a bunch of tiny teeth and 3 eyes, and has in the first one a ribbed cocoon, and the second figure sort of sections, like a caterpillar. We also have one from Jewish fairy tales, which depicts a block of wood and a tiny worm at the base of it. I'm going to put this in the chat. Yeah, so we're seeing actual laser vision as a question. The idea is that when it looks at it, the thing breaks. Rabbi Natan Slifkin brings up a real-life snail that when it goes on things, the acid or whatnot in its snail trail eats away at whatever it goes on as a way to claim this is not so far from reality. Just a few months ago, so you're in luck with this timing, a favorite artist, Ezra Rose, who was recently featured in the Radical Jewish Calendar, made this depiction of the Shamir, which is a purple galaxy-like body with 3 sets of hands, the bottom 2 clasped and the top 2 in the Vulcan salute kind of form of the Kohen priests. 3 eyes on the face and 5 eyes going down the side, and a shin above. For a Shamir, or perhaps for Shaddai, like you would have on a mezuzah. To me, it looks very ready to work. So this is what Ezra Rose says about the Shamir. The Shamir worm, used by King Solomon to cut the stones for the first temple, as no tools ever used in bloodshed could build a monument to peace. My favorite Jewish created sacred monster, a symbol of creative rather than deadly destruction. Pirkei Avot 5:6 teaches that the Shamir was created at the very last moment, the twilight before the first Shabbat, along with a number of other fantastical things, including the mouth of Miriam's well, the land that swallows Korach, Balaam's talking donkey, the Hebrew letters, and the first pair of tongs. Yes, Ori knows it, the tongs, and the Shamir worm, and some say the demons, which we'll get to in just a second. If you want further reading about the Shamir, Gittin 68, this is also Talmud, A and B, it's a very long story, talks about how King Solomon came to get the Shamir. It's got demons, it's got birds, it's got mountaintop removal. It certainly deserves a film. This is Torah too. Okay. Any thoughts on the Shamir before we dive into the demons? We'll be in the demons for the rest of our evening together. All right, cool. Let's hop in. So, Pirkei Avot 5:6 actually says the Mazikin are the kind of demons created at the final twilight, the in-between time, the non-binary time between day and night, this mixing moment where the supernatural can exist. This is a still from the film The Vigil, which is about somebody who returns to his Orthodox community in New York to watch over a body overnight. This still was very hard to pin down in Hulu, but this is their Mazik, which stands for this demon of ancestral trauma and trauma in general and how it clings to us. It's really, really wonderful. I highly recommend it. It's a Jewish haunted house film at its core. Yeah, okay. Ian asks what specifically about the entries we're in now causes them to be demons, and it's that they're often called a demon. They're called a mazik or a shade, or we'll see actually the kings and queens of shades. So the word mazik comes from the root nazak, which means to hurt or injure or damage. And mazikin are a common kind of demon. Here are some quick tips about mazikin. They hang around in ruins and bathrooms. They are mentioned by the 3rd page of the Talmud and many, many times throughout. As we said, they were created right before the first Shabbat, and you can tell that they're demons because they have chicken feet. If you ever want to see them, you would take the afterbirth of a firstborn black cat, born to a firstborn black cat, burn it up, grind it up, and then rub it in your eyes. You do want to make sure that you put those ashes in an iron tube so that the demons don't steal them. The Talmud immediately says that somebody did this and was very hurt by the whole thing, so you should watch out. They were created right after people, and in fact, there's a story that between so Adam, the first man, after his son Cain kills his other son Abel, spends 130 years hooking up with demons and making more demon babies. They also say that some of the folks in the Tower of Babel story were turned into demons. They come from lots and lots of places. There's a question that they're not necessarily evil, and I would agree that demons are not necessarily evil. At one point, we get a demon named Yosef Sheda, which just means Joe the demon, who just kind of hangs out with the rabbis, sometimes gives a Shabbat sermon, and flies all around the Jewish world. And, you know, they hang out in ruins. If bad things happen to you in ruins, it's maybe your fault for going to the ruins. There's one story where somebody drops a barrel of wine on a demon, and the demon breaks it, and they have to take the demon to court, and the demon gets a judgment against the demon for breaking the wine barrel, but they put the wine barrel on the demon, so it wasn't their fault for breaking it. What questions have I missed here? Yes, if you don't have any organic firstborn cat after birth, store-bought is fine. And any ideas to why they were created? Yeah, and why specifically before Shabbat? There's this question of, was God racing at the very last minute to create all these miracles, all these miraculous things? Or was God utilizing that special moment of twilight in order to do that? I think you can go either way on that. Why God created beings to harm us? I would love to hear thoughts about that question. Why did God create angels? Angels are called malachim, which means like workers. Demons are damagers. I like this this idea that they have ambiguous morality and can teach us lessons. Yeah, that God has done this for our benefit, and it's for us to figure out what that is somehow. There's a wonderful text in Chagiga, somewhere around 15 or 16, which talks about how demons and angels and people and animals are all connected and related in a big Venn diagram. We can learn it another time together. The other term for demons is Shadeem, or Sheda, if you want the feminine. This is from a very good friend of mine, Alex Ill, who performs as Yotzeret Shadeem. It's a Jewish harsh noise project. We'll hear a little bit later. She makes demon instruments and plays them. So Shadeem are even more ubiquitous than mazikin. And as we said earlier, they're not always focused on harming you. Each one of us has, to our left, 1,000 demons, and to our right, 10,000 demons. In fact, the friction of them being at our sides is why our clothes wear out, even if we're just sitting and studying. Yet performing mitzvot, commandments, grants us angels, which battle the demons. Somebody had asked in the questions for this program, what about left-handed people? There's an answer in the Midrash Tanhuma that it's because you put on tefillin on your left phylacteries, your prayer straps, that you're doing such a big mitzvah with your left that the angels are repelled. But you have to do a lot more work with your right hand to go up to bat against them. I think with left-handed people, it might switch around. I would ask the left-handed people in my life, where are you noticing more demons coming from? And based on that. Jesse explains we do have tiny non-animal things in multitudes surrounding us. We just call them viruses and bacteria, which I think is a really interesting explanation for demons, that they are kinds of sicknesses. There's people in the era of Haskalah, which is the Jewish Enlightenment period, where we wanted to make our religion more rational so that we could fit in better with German culture. I think it was an odd move on our part that robbed us of a lot of our supernatural. But people were trying to say, why do you think that it's a demon making you sick when there's all of this trash outside your drain pipe? And when Maimonides, a commentator who was very in that rational place, said there are no demons, the demons all went away. But a few hundred years later, when the very spiritually powerful Vilna Gaon said that there are demons, in fact, they all came back. A thought for you. I highly recommend at this point the podcast Throwing Shade, Better Living Through Jewish Demonology. I just listened to an episode today to get in the mood. It hasn't had a new one for a little while, but it's a wonderful introduction to all of these subjects with a lot of good humor to it. I want to draw attention to this psalm, Psalm 91. Psalm 91 has a lot of these lines that are like, you'll be safe or invulnerable to the arrow that flies at night. And the rabbis took the arrow that flies at night and turned into a demon called the arrow that flies at night, and did the same with anonymous enemies to our left and right, turning them into demons. It's this way that they took poetry and turned it into things around them. So what's the power structure with demons? We've got thousands beside us at all times. We have Ashmedai. Ashmedai is the son of the demon queen Naamah and is the king of demons and also the arch nemesis to King Solomon. This is a depiction from Jacqueline Nichols, who has a blog called Draw Yomi, like the Daf Yomi, the practice of reading a page of Talmud every day, but instead it's drawing the page of Talmud every day, depicting Ashmedai here with a crown and a very spindly body and fingers. These wine glasses refer to how the demons have authority to get you if you're drinking in pairs. So if you drink 2 drinks, demons can get you. So drink a third, or drink 1, or none. This is in Pesachim that it gets discussed, because on Passover we are asked to drink 4 cups of wine, which is a pair of pears, but we're actually safe from demons on Passover, so no need to stress. So what's Ashmedai's deal? He once threw King Solomon halfway around the world and impersonated him for many years. He was only discovered because Solomon's hundreds of wives noticed that he had chicken feet, which is a sure sign of being a shade, even if you're the king of the Shadeem. And despite being a demon and a king of the demons, the rabbis still taught that he studies Torah every day at the Yeshiva Shel Mala, the study hall that is in heaven. Yeah, we're seeing Elijah's cup as the 5th cup, and then Miriam's cup as the 6th. So that's 3 sets of pairs, but you're still safe. You can keep on tacking them on. You're good on Passover. No Jewish monster manual here is complete without Lilith. Lilith honestly deserves her own talk. I had the honor of teaching a class on Lilith for the Spiral Heart pagan group this past a few months ago. They had a convergence, and I got to teach about Lilith because they were interested in doing Lilith work and wanted to learn more about who Lilith was. And I was very excited to be able to share Lilith's history. She has a really lush corpus of legends, and she cleverly adapts to the age in which she finds herself. She's known in most legends as Adam's first wife, created at the same time as Adam, so they are like equal from dirt. And yet Adam tries to be all patriarchy, and Lilith has none of that. And so she pronounces the holy name and flies out of the Garden of Eden to the Red Sea, where the Egyptians will all be drowned in the Exodus. And some angels go after her to try to convince her to come back. And she's like, no. And they're like, well, kill your babies every day. And she's like, well, I'll kill human babies every day. Square? And they're like, fine. And so people made amulets against her, which is like a whole writing page of paper, or incantation bowls where you have a bowl and you have a demon drawn inside with binding text all around it. And you plant that outside your front door to keep the demon out. And Lilith was very important to explain, as we're seeing in the chat, killing babies, why your baby dies in infancy or miscarriage when we didn't have good science to explain, or to try to keep babies alive longer. She also was blamed for seducing husbands and being a homewrecker, and any way that you could weaponize misogyny. Since the 1970s, thanks to especially Judith Plaskow, she's been in the text, The Coming of Lilith. She was reframed into a women's liberation, girl power kind of icon who refused to be subservient to men. And they, in a time when babies weren't dying as much, overwrote that part of her history. I would love to hear more. So Sarah is offering that I feel the women's lib version is so disrespectful. And I would love to hear more about that if you want to share. It's okay if you don't. I want to talk.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't unmute. Yeah, so I was actually just talking about this issue with some friends, like literally last night. And just like a lot of people have created her in this cool, like goth mommy who like loves and cares about people and like whatever. And like it's really interesting because for so many people, like Lilith has been a source of miscarriage and pain and violence against birth givers and life givers. And so to kind of appropriate and mistake and put these things upon her, which often, I mean, I'd argue are really more true of Hava, of life, than they are of Lilith, and then to completely ignore when so often Jewish people are saying, hey, Lilith isn't this thing you're making up. She's scary. She's not someone you want to invite into your home. And by opening yourself up to the mistaken concept, it's, I believe, very dangerous for individuals who choose to do that for themselves, but also just very disrespectful to the trauma that Lilith is centered in so many people's lives. Yeah, and that's kind of what my friends and I had been talking about.
I really, really appreciate that perspective. And thank you so much for elaborating. When I think about Lilith, I think about, I like to kind of imagine her as actually real in this way. And somebody who was put into a role and took that role for many hundreds of years and wasn't as needed for that role anymore, and found a new way to survive, and found that in being a feminist icon, and seeing her as actually remorphed when Judith Plaskow wrote her in The Coming of Lilith as this liberated woman who was being looked down upon for being so, and who Adam demonized, and Eve bought into the demonization until she actually met her, and then they recognized each other in each other. And just as Maimonides saying there are no demons changed the reality of demons, that when Plaskow said, this is Lilith, it sort of changed Lilith. I think it's so important when you are seeing Lilith as a feminist icon, not to forget everything that you brought up, not to forget all of that embodiment of trauma and embodiment of destruction of family and loss of child and all of that sadness. Any single perspective of Lilith is too limited, is what I want to say. That she I love her so much because she has gone through so many transformations, that she has existed and been used and seen in different ways throughout time. I think, to me, I find disrespectful when I see in media her being subservient to anybody. Like anything that puts Lilith and Satan together, and she's like second to Satan, is, I think, anti-Semitic. I think it's like, and it's mean to Lilith to like do that to her. Yeah. Noam, go for it.
Just wanting to respond to this idea of putting the two of them together as potentially anti-Semitic. Well, I definitely agree there are iterations where it is that way. We also have Yiddish folk writers who have historically placed Lilith as the queen of hell, as like a counterpart, and like works in conjunction with the king of hell. And I am grumpy that I can't remember the name of the specific author I'm thinking of, but I'll drop it in the chat as soon as Google helps me remember. But we have Jewish authors doing this as well in folk tales, which I think is fun and complicates the narrative a bit.
Yeah, I agree. There's actually so many different Lilith narratives that there's kind of almost two discernible Liliths. There is one who has relationship with Samael, the poison of God, and even maybe is the Nachash, the snake in the Garden of Eden. And I think what I was saying was I don't like the Christian Satan being attached to Lilith. We certainly have Hasatan, which comes from Job. Yeah, Isaac Bashevis singer, absolutely. Yeah, Christianized Lilith messes with me a lot. I think also doing this kind of research and learning about what the Jewish version of Hasatan is, or the Jewish angel of death, or what happens to Leviathan in our text, helps me to sort of deprogram the Christian narratives that are given to me living in the United States and in this like Christian hegemony culture. And I get to like reclaim this history and this mythology. Nicole, you've had your hand up for a while.
I feel like equating Lilith with Satan is more, and I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm not saying that mythologies can't be mixed for fiction. I think it could be really fun. Sometimes it's really fun and well done when mythologies are mixed, but a lot of the time it just feels ignorant. It feels like writers are unwilling to do more than precursory research into another religion and another culture and other figures, and are just working what they know and appropriating this name or this cool design without any regard for all of the interesting and unique and different legends and myths and associations attached with it.
It's why I was so honored to be invited by the Spiral Heart Pagan group to speak about Lilith, because I don't think it's wrong to see Lilith in the world, even if you are Jewish or not. Lilith, I think, ultimately comes from Mesopotamian like culture in particular, and the Lilith that we have has been Judaized for centuries, but it's not uniquely Jewish. But the Lilith that exists now has gone through that lineage, and I think there are ways to use Lilith without it being appropriative or disrespectful to her, right? Yeah, she's connected with these screech owls, these like night beasts of screeching. I want to talk as well. I don't think I've put this in the chat yet, but this Siona Benjamin depiction here, where Lilith is blue She's a Bombay-based artist who's descended from the Bene Israel Jews of India, and has a whole series of women from like the matriarchs and from the Hebrew Bible brought into the way that deities are depicted in Indian culture. So she's blue here with these blue wings, a side wound, a snake of an armband, and roses of fire all around her head with a hamsa. And she's saying, 1,000 of years I have waited, keeping the embers of vengeance glowing in my heart. This very empowered and impassioned and also weeping creature and figure. I recommend the whole series to you. It's really fantastic. Okay, we wrap in just about 18 minutes. So I'd like to bring us to sort of our grand finale for the evening. I commissioned a new piece from Yotzeret Shadeem, Alex Ill, who I mentioned earlier in the Shadeem. Yotzeret Shadeem means creator of demons. And this is my favorite demon queen. This is Agrat Bat Machlat. So we learned late in the Talmud tractate Pesachim, near where we learned about Ashmedai, Asmodeus, a lovely treatise on demonology. And we get Agrat Bat Machlat, who I'd like to translate as the scraping daughter of sickness. And here's what we learn. This is acid etched copper. So this is copper underneath. It's been painted black and then etched to get the designs here. So metal. And then here below, the acid is being poured on it in this acid bath, and we'll see the result in just a sec. So we learn, do not go alone, not on Tuesday nights and not on Shabbat nights. For Agrat Bat Machlat and her 180,000 angels of twisting ruin go out. And each and every one of them has the authority to seize and unshape you on its own. For once, Agrat was a menace on every day, until she met the miracle worker Rabbi Hanina ben Doza. She teased him, if not for what they say about the power of your Torah in heaven, I would have endangered you. Here we have the finished piece in gleaming copper. Hanina ben Doza retorted, if I am so thought of in heaven, I decree that you never come and mess with people in inhabited spaces again. His power, his Torah, would have been enough had she not cried out, please give me some relief, some space, some liberty. To which Rabbi Hanina ben Doza gave her liberty over Tuesday nights and Shabbat nights. She went through the same thing a few hundred years later with the sage Abaye, who is no stranger to the supernatural. And he likewise decreed that she leave and all of her destructive angels leave as well. But we know that demons still enter inhabited places, so it didn't quite work. Why Tuesday night and why Shabbat nights? Anybody have any guesses? I've got some research into it, but I would love to hear some thoughts. Yeah, Jesse, go for it.
It's close to when we read the Torah. So Mondays we read the Torah, and then maybe it's had like a cool off period, and Shabbat nights we're about to, but we haven't recharged yet.
I really love that one for Tuesday. So you'd be out in the market days were Monday and Wednesday. So those are the days that people were most likely to be out. So they're less likely to be out on Tuesday, so she can have it. Shabbat, likewise, you would want to be at home for that. Other guesses? I like this idea that it's close to the Havdalah time limit. You can do this blessing to end Shabbat up until Tuesday. I like the idea that we have a second soul that inhabits us on Shabbat, and that maybe that would be extra protective. Noam?
This isn't quite a thought as to why Shabbat, but it makes me think about Shalom Aleichem, which we sing on Friday nights when we invite the angels in and we say, hello, thank you so much for coming. And then we're like, okay, goodbye. It is time for you to go away now. And I'm finding it interesting that her posse of what we might imagine is her demon friends is described specifically as angels of ruin. I'm wondering if that's who we are telling to please don't stick around too long on Friday nights.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah, one of the reasons she's always captured my imagination is because she has Malache Havala, which is this like angel of pain or angel of damage. You know, I translate it as twisting ruin. Yeah, and you would expect demons, but she's got angels. I would like to play you a little bit of the musical piece that went along with this. I linked it in the chat. I'll link it again here. This is a genre of music called harsh noise. So you may want to turn down your your sound a bit. It's made from a contact microphone. So it's a microphone that's directly on the piece of metal, of copper, and picks up the vibrations on the metal rather than like a microphone in front of you that we would sing into if you want words or vocals to come through. You need to put your mouth on the piece of metal and speak into it, and the vibrations are picked up. So this is the new piece Agrat from Yotzer Shadeem. Okay, feel free to listen to all 4 minutes and 8 seconds on your own. Good 100 Gex shout out. Yeah, absolutely. Please support Alex, Yotzer Shadeem. There's a really cool album I like where she used a contact microphone with her snake while it was shedding its skin. If that's not incredible enough, I don't know what is. I'm going to be sure to share with her your responses, and please buy her music. And please support all the artists that are shown this evening by following their work, and if you'd like to buy their pieces. I love when people create artwork of these things. I think there's a certain abstractness and quality of the Jewish fantastical when it comes to art, and I would love to see more of it. Okay. So we got about 10 minutes left. I would like to offer some space to reflect on our framing questions. And then I'll give just a recap of some particular recommendations for further reading. So our framing questions were, what can our legendary creatures teach us about ancestral imagination? How can we see and utilize these fantasies in our lives? Who would you like to learn more about? And where can you find more about them? And the last question, what makes something a Jewish monster? I'm watching on a phone. Can I get the links emailed to me? We'll see what we can do. I can certainly compile. I can certainly give these slides in response. Yeah, Andy's got it. Cheers. Sarah.
Okay, sorry. Oh, here, I have a face. There we go. That's my face in my bunk beds. But I was just gonna say, thinking about this fourth question, what makes something a Jewish monster, is something I've been thinking about a lot because I teach little children. They're like 11 to 12 now. They're all about to do their B'nai Mitzvah, and we were talking about Jewish stories and Jewish storytelling, and like when you create a story, if you are a Jewish person and you just tell a story about your life, is that a Jewish story? Maybe, maybe not. When Avraham has stories about his life told that are just him doing his daily activities, why are those Jewish stories? And I think this idea of like Jewish monsters relates heavily to that. It's like, are the monsters that we as Jewish people like experiencing like inherently Jewish because we are Jewish people experiencing them? Like what, I mean, I guess that goes to a bigger question of what defines Jewish narrative and Jewish tradition. But I definitely think it's something that like, how do we relate and work with Jewish narrative? Because like, for me, like Jinn was raised with me originally coming from my Armenian family. And then I found it was also present in like Mizrahi Jewish traditions as well as like Islam. And so place-based monsterhood is like super interesting. I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. There's a question I think about what makes something valid or authentic, and especially in our own narratives. And I would like to say yes. And if a Jewish person shares the story of their selves, you know, and their imagination, it becomes a Jewish story. You know, you're Jewish enough. There isn't some test. I don't know. It's I think a lot of us can feel that invalidness, and yeah. Thank you. I will say that in doing this research for years, I like to practice different ways of imagining the world. I think that a lot of the systems that cause harm in our world continue to exist by claiming that they're the only way. I think about this in terms of prison abolition, that if we believe that if we buy into this, there has to be this, or kinds of colonialism, there has to be this, practicing imagining different possibilities, even if they seem completely undoable with the materials we have now, it at least frees us to imagine the world being different. And I think practicing that with the fun stuff, with the monsters, helps to do it in larger ways. And just picture the world being a little different, think about different ways of seeing things, imagine different possibilities. Okay. Some text that I've mentioned throughout here, putting in the chat one more time. The Sacred Monsters by Rabbi Natan Slifkin. He has a whole museum of biblical zoology. I really recommend checking out this work if you're into these things. Throwing Shade, Better Living Through Jewish Demonology, excellent podcast. And the Jewish Encyclopedia of Myth, Magic, and Mysticism is my go-to. It never reaches the shelf. It lives on a stack near my workspace because I end up needing it so often. And it's very lovely hyperlinked and sourced Talmudically. If you're interested in some Lilith poetry from the 80s, my favorite collection is Lilith and Her Demons by Enid Dame, which you can read the whole text of at that link there. And more Lilith stories in Lilith's Cave, Jewish Tales of the Supernatural, collected by Howard Schwartz, who is a really phenomenal Jewish folklorist. I also linked here the art of Eileen Wynn Lederer, who is a Pittsburgh-based illustrator. This is her version of the Angel of Death, sort of looking sad with these butterfly wings and covered with eyes, as described in the Talmud, with the plagues here. Just really wonderful, fantastic artwork. Let's see. Dave English says, my mom called, so I missed asking this question. Are there any American Jewish monsters? And I love that question. Ones that are particular to America. I think I'll have to get back to you. If anybody has anything real quick to pop it in there. I think I love the conceit of a book called American Gods by Neil Gaiman, which is that when people came to America, they brought with them all of their gods. And their gods had to do various things to survive as their descendants forgot about their gods. Pumpkin spice hummus, a real American Jewish monster. I would say the chocolate dessert hummus. And I think about that in terms of Lilith a lot, about a myth brought to life that has to adapt to a changing world. So I'll definitely get back to you on that one. I really appreciate that question. That's what I have for you. We have a hard stop in 2 minutes, so I'm just going to pop in. I, in a brilliant moment, finally realized that I wanted my URL to be talmudmagic.com. There's really nothing there at the moment, but check it out in a few weeks, and there might be one or two things. You can contact me through those sites, through the Twitter and Instagram, if you'd like to. I would love to come back, talk more about Lilith. We pretty much skipped over golems entirely, because I've got lots of other stuff on golems there, and more on any of this. Angels, it's really bottomless, and it's always being created anew. And I hope that everyone here tonight has been inspired by one of these or more, and I would love to see what you create and what you do with the Jewish Monster Manual. Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom if we don't talk before then, and a happy Halloween to you. Lila Tov.
Come back in. I just want to say I see all of these messages coming in the chat. I will definitely let my team know that there is a request for a part 2, maybe 3, 4, 5. As Olivia mentioned, this is a bottomless well, a bottomless resource for us to tap into. Thank you all so much for being here. I will be sending out our feedback email, recording, and links and chat, all of the many resources, either tomorrow or Friday, depending on when we can get all of that put together. But don't worry, all of this will be coming to an inbox near you. Thanks again, everyone. Virtual round of applause. Thank you so much, Olivia, for this time together, and may you all be safe and well. Good night, folks.